Well, thank you everybody for joining us for our Greenways Advocacy Strategy webinar. We'll start with some quick introductions and then jump right in. I'm Dylan Carey. I'm Director of Policy and Planning for Parks and Trails New York. I'm joined by my colleagues Erica and Will. Erica, do you want to?
Hi, yeah, I'm Erica Schneider, the Policy and Planning Manager, and helping run the webinar today.
And Will?
Hi, everyone. Will Cote, Senior Director of Public Lands.
Great. So next slide, Erica. So just a quick agenda for our webinar today. We're going to start off with just a recap of our Greenways Advocacy Summit and a little bit of background on our Greenway Trail advocacy efforts during this year's legislative session. Then I'm going to get into some of the nuts and bolts, or actually Erica will get into the nuts and bolts on our Greenway Trails for a Green Future package and talk about how that package fared in the legislature this year and some ideas for legislation for upcoming sessions. We're going to talk a little bit about the need for funding for Greenway Trails and some strategies that we might pursue to try to obtain that funding in future years' budgets. And then talk about, like I said, the strategy and how we're going to move forward to build a statewide coalition to support building out our network of Greenway Trails. So next slide. Just a little bit of background about us, about Parks and Trails New York, for those who aren't familiar with us. We are a statewide nonprofit, the state's leading advocate for parks and trails. We've been working since 1985 to expand, protect, and promote a network of parks, trails, and open spaces for use and enjoyment by all. And for a number of years, we've done advocacy around our state park system with our great partners, the Open Space Institute. We've hosted Parks Advocacy Day on an annual basis. We've also done a lot of advocacy around building out our Greenway Trails network, from working to help Greenway Trail projects get started in communities around the state, to helping to close the gaps in the Erie Canalway Trail over the last couple of decades. And really those advocacy efforts led to the creation of the Empire State Trail. So next slide, Erica. So this year in May, we hosted the first Greenways Advocacy Summit. And this was a gathering of advocates from around the state to really discuss some of the issues and the opportunities facing our state's Greenway network, and then meet with legislators in support of the Greenway Trails for a Green Future package that Erica is going to talk about a little bit later, but also to lay some groundwork and help to educate legislators as to the need and the opportunity for Greenway funding to help advance Greenway networks in communities around the state. We're thrilled that nearly 75 advocates joined us on Monday, May 20th, from 24 partner organizations, and we were able to meet with more than 40 legislative offices, as well as a number of other legislators that we talked to in the halls, connections that we made, and really just had a positive impact overall on supporting our state's Greenway network. So next slide. I'm going to do, I'm going to give a quick recap of what we discussed in that morning program before turning it over to Erica to talk about how the bill package ultimately fared. So we called it a summit and not an advocacy day because we wanted to have a little bit more of a chance for our attendees to hear a discussion about the impacts that Greenway Trails are having in communities around the state, and to talk about the potential for building out future Greenway Trail networks. So we started with this panel, and we had the four great speakers on that you can see listed on the screen join us to discuss why we should be investing in our Greenway Trails, how they can help benefit communities from an equity perspective, how they can help build connections and allow for safe transportation in addition to recreational opportunities, how bringing touring cyclists and building out Greenway Trail networks can help folks from around the state discover the natural beauty and bring some of those tourism impacts to communities around the state. And then really talk about the opportunity that's in front of us, from the amount of federal funding that's available for various infrastructure projects to just the momentum that's going into building out Greenway Trail networks, not only in New York, but in states around the country. So next slide. We had what we called the Big Map, which was a great opportunity for attendees to look at the potential Greenway Trail network, look at some projects that are in the works, and see where we can be having a greater impact in building out the network. It's also a chance for folks that we've worked with in different spheres and that we know have worked with each other in different spheres to come together and really get this sense of being part of a broader statewide effort. And I know a number of the folks that we worked with and that we met with, or that attended and joined the meetings with us that day, really did value the opportunity to not just meet with legislators, but also to connect with advocates from other parts of the state who are doing similar work, facing similar challenges, and really excited about similar opportunities. So next slide. So I'm going to give a little bit of a background, take a step back and talk about what we mean when we're talking about Greenway trails. So Greenway trails are these corridors of open space that have a shared use trail. And these are typically separated from vehicular traffic, separated from roadways, although they can be side paths running just alongside them. They have a flat graded surface and or improved tread that allows for use by those of all ages and abilities. And they allow for non-motorized transportation and recreation use. And I say allow for because there are greenway trails around the state that also allow for motorized use. We don't necessarily mean to define greenway trails in a manner that excludes specific uses other than motor vehicles, but we also don't want to give the indication that that these are trails that are attempting, that by defining something as a greenway trail, we're attempting to limit existing uses in accord. So moving on to the next slide. I talked a little bit about the Empire State Trail and the history that went into it. Back in 2017, Governor Cuomo announced that there would be this effort to close the gaps in two major trail networks, the Erie Canalway Trail running from Buffalo to Albany, and the Hudson River Valley Greenway running from New York City to Whitehall. By investing $200 million in capital funding that was able to leverage an additional $100 million in private, local, and federal funding, we were able to do this. The state was able to create the Empire State Trail, and it today is a 750-mile trail that's about 60% off-road. You can see the green parts are the off-road on the map on the screen, and the yellow parts are on-road. And it really is a nationally known destination. It is the longest state multi-use trail network in the country, and it is something that folks are coming from around the world to ride, to enjoy, to experience. So next slide. However, there are a lot of challenges, and these are challenges that we're helping to explore and to work through with our agency partners, but also helping to identify when and where there are legislative solutions to address some of these issues. One of the challenges is that the Empire State Trail has a dispersed management structure. State Parks has day-to-day management responsibilities. They manage the empiretrail.ny.gov website, distribute paper maps, but they only directly maintain about 40 miles of trail, and that's primarily Old Erie Canal State Historic Park. Similarly, the Hudson River Valley Greenway performs trail counts on the north-south leg. They provide grants to projects within their coverage area, and they're a statutorily defined state entity that has a specific geography that they serve. And they perform maintenance on the Albany Hudson Electric Trail, again, about 35 miles. Again, the New York State Canal, or also the New York State Canal Corporation has a major role. They provide maintenance responsibility for about 125 miles, so they're not responsible for most of the Canalway Trail system. New York State DOT has responsibility, but only for their on-road stretches. And they also have some design standards that must be met in terms of signage and implementing some signage standards. But they do not have that same responsibility and that same regulatory authority over the off-road stretches. And finally, there's municipalities. Local governments, counties, towns, villages, they're responsible for most of the maintenance of the different stretches of the Empire State Trail. There's a total of probably 70 or 80 different municipalities, or different entities, if you count municipalities and state government, that do have maintenance and management responsibility. And so understanding how we can keep the Empire State Trail maintained to the highest standard, the standard that we think it should be, how we can make sure that the opportunities that long distance cycle tourism and that greenway trails as transportation and recreation corridors offer communities are fully understood by those management and maintenance entities. That's a challenge as well. And how can we communicate with these folks? How can we make sure that they're being responsive to issues that are being faced on the ground. That's another challenge. So next slide. However, there's a lot of great work that's underway. In 2021, New York State released the first statewide Greenway Trails Plan. And this was a plan that was done in response to legislation that PTNY, with partnership from a number of organizations around the state, was able to help get legislation passed and to have them create this. Now, the statewide Greenway Trails Plan is a great document. It's got a number of helpful resources within it, and we're working with parks to help see it implemented. There's 7 goals that are outlined. We've got them listed on the screen here. And while these goals are outlined, there's also a number of things that I think the Greenway Trails Plan doesn't address that we are hoping that we can work with partners to help see addressed. For instance, the Greenway Trails Plan calls for expanding the Greenway Trail system to reach more New Yorkers in more areas, but it doesn't give any kind of prioritization, doesn't give any kind of plan for how we'll go about doing that. What are the priority corridors to be met? How can we be identifying funding to help see these projects completed so that we can do things like extend the Long Island Greenway to help serve all of Long Island, or build out stretches of other long distance corridors that are either existing partially or really just conceived of? And how can we do some of the collaborative work and the promotion work that we know is necessary for the Greenway Trails Network to thrive in the way that it could? So there's a lot of work to be done, and some of the legislative fixes that are going to be talking about in just a minute are ideas that were first raised in this Greenway Trails Plan, or maybe not first, but raised notably in this Greenway Trails Plan, and that we've identified as things that require legislation to address. So next slide. With that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Erica, who's going to talk through some of our wins and some of the progress that we made in this legislative session, and some of the other the other places that other pieces of the bill package stand. So Erica.
Great, thank you, Dylan. So yeah, obviously we gathered in May to take our momentum for this legislative package and see if we could bring it to the next level, to see how many of these bills we could get passed before the end of the session. Basically, this package of legislation was designed to get at expanding the trail user network expanding the trail network and making it safer. So looking at ways to create incentives, remove barriers to trail development, and addressing some of the safety concerns that we've identified through our experience in interacting with trail users over the last few years. So kicking it off, the Empire State Trail Detour Requirement Bill passed this session, which is so exciting and very much due to the passionate advocates that we had at the lobby day and the hundreds of people that sent their legislators and leadership in the legislature messages encouraging them to step up and pass this bill. So basically, this came out of our recognition that the Empire State Trail, when it had to be closed for construction or trail rehabilitation, trail damage, it wasn't always the entities that were doing that weren't always creating detours. So that's where this bill came from, and now, now we're at the point where it has passed both the houses. But it is not law yet because it still needs to be signed by the governor. So that is kind of where we're at right now in the legislative process, and trying to make sure that this bill gets signed officially into law, and that whenever there is a trail closure on the Empire State Trail, there will be a safe established detour that gets communicated to New York State Parks and communicated to trail users. That was the only bill that passed both houses. So now I'm going to get into some of the bills that made it pretty far, really close, but didn't quite take it over the finish line. So one of those was the Greenway Trail Design Standards Bill, which would establish uniform design standards for all new Greenway trails under the jurisdiction of state parks. So that could have been any trail that received funding from parks. And this bill would also have established a definition of greenway trails in state law. And it did pass the Senate, but it did not make it all the way through the Assembly. It passed the Parks Committee and then the Ways and Means and Rules Committees, but then it died on the Assembly floor calendar. It was crunch time and it didn't make it to a vote. So this is still a bill that we were really excited to see get so far, and we're really encouraged by its progress. The last bill that made significant progress was the Bicycle and Pedestrian Access on Bridges bill. And this was modeled after a bill that was passed a few years ago to require the MTA to consider bike and pedestrian access in their capital plans. And that project is well underway and being considered in MTA's plans. So we took that idea and wanted to see it applied to all major bridges, especially those across the Hudson River. Up on the screen, this is an example of the Kingston Rhinecliff Bridge that technically has bike lanes, but if anyone has ever ridden it, it is not a fun bridge to ride. So just making this bill would have made sure that any future improvements would include accommodations. And it passed the Assembly, Corporations, and Ways and Means committees, but it died in the Rules Committee and it didn't even make it out of the Senate Transportation Committee. Right-of-way for all trail users and crosswalks was a bill that sought to address the lack of right-of-way that cyclists have when a trail crosses a roadway. They are expected to become pedestrians, which is just not how trails are used in practice. So that results in signs like this one, dismount before crossing. That is not often going to happen. So it would have protected cyclists and crosswalks, and it just didn't make it out of Transportation Committee in either of the houses. And Power Line Trail Bill is a really exciting one that would codify the right of utility providers to enter into agreements to build greenway trails along electric utility corridors. Like this one, like happened with the Albany Hudson Electric Trail. This one also encountered some challenges, and it died in the Assembly Corporations and the Senate Energy and Telecommunications committees. Didn't make it out of those. The CHIPS funding formula update was a bill that came out of the Empire State Trail Plan. It was a recommended implementation action to secure more funding and address the issue of, or the ongoing issue of, lack of funds for maintenance, especially maintenance of greenway trails. It would have taken the CHIPS program, which is a highway funding program, and would have allowed municipalities to have used those funds for the construction and maintenance of greenway trails. This one, of course, also experienced some pushback, significant pushback. So that died in transportation in both houses, didn't make it out of that. And the recreational use statute. So this bill would have, it's not the best name. That's one of those things that we want to talk with you all about today, about figuring out better ways to communicate what these bills actually do, because this one would change. The recreational use statute exists, but it would have changed it a little bit to remove a big barrier to trail development, allowing or clarifying that property owners can allow trail access to their land for recreational purposes, for all trail use purposes, not just the specific list that they list in the current recreational use statute. And it would protect them, protect property owners from actions resulting in harm or notably death, which is not included in the current law. So this is really, really technical, but can be a huge barrier when there's just one landowner preventing a trail from being connected. And this bill died in judiciary in both houses. This one is one of the ones that that wasn't proposed by Pat Fahey this session. It has existed and we've been advocating for it for many years. And we haven't been able to gain traction, I think, because of how technical this bill is. So we're hoping to brainstorm some other fresh ideas that you all might have. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dylan to explain a little bit about what's next for this package and move into some of that brainstorming that we want to do together.
Thanks, Erica. Before we do that, though, there are a couple of questions that have come in that I think we can discuss.
Oh yeah, good idea.
Kathy Nolan had asked us which entity is charged with establishing and posting safe detour routes. And the answer is that it will require state parks, per this bill, it would require the owner of a segment of the Empire State Trail to coordinate with state parks on having the detour route planned and to have the signage posted along the detour. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that when a trail's closed, they're going to be building a temporary trail adjacent to it, the way that they might do if there was, you know, a highway closure in places. But what it does say is that, you know, they do need to plan for an alternate route to be provided. And state parks is required to provide the requisite signage. A second bill is, or second question is from Kyle Hatch, asked if we have feedback on some of the specific issues related to the bills that did not pass. For example, what are some of the issues that legislators had with the Greenway trails along the utility corridors? And I can share that some of that is, you know, we just get hearsay. You know, we don't always know why a bill doesn't make it onto a committee agenda for some, for instance. For some of those, we do know some of the issues. I know the utility corridor bill received some pushback because there's concern anytime that a utility company is required to do something, because there's a view that they would then pass that cost on to ratepayers. I think it's an argument that we can overcome. I think it's something that we can demonstrate the relatively low cost to the utilities and the potential benefit. But because we weren't requiring utility, you know, the bill doesn't require utility companies to build trails on their corridors. It just opens the opportunity for them to work with municipalities to build these trails and to provide some more information on what utility corridor trails could look like. And again, that's one where, you know, we didn't necessarily have you know, direct feedback or direct coordination with those committee chairs to be able to really see that pass this session. And then finally, we have a question from Pauline on provisions for equestrian use. And I think that the answer to that is that none of these bills specifically speak to allowing or disallowing use on any stretch of trail. We're not necessarily in the business of specifically dictating to any local governments what use their greenway trails should allow, or to state parks or others what you know, what kinds of use their trails should allow. You know, we don't necessarily know what's best for trails in different parts of the state. Local governments often, or the land manager for any given stretch of trail would know that best. So that's, again, not something that any of the bills specifically speak to, is exactly which uses are allowed or aren't allowed. So with that, I think we're going to move on to just talk a little bit more about some of the, you know, some bill ideas. And I know that we've already actually gotten a suggestion in the Q&A about a way that we can sort of work to help strengthen the recreational use statute bill, a way to provide some municipal insurance coverage for private or public trail segments. And that's definitely something that we'd want to explore. But before we jump into that, I just kind of want to provide a little bit more information for everybody on what happens now with all of those bills that we just discussed. So as Erica mentioned, the EST detours bill is the only one that passed both houses. And so the next step for that is that it goes to the governor for her signature or veto. Now, we're hopeful that the governor will sign it, but I wouldn't say it's by any means a slam dunk. So we're going to be working to try to get a public campaign around trying to ensure that the governor is supportive of that bill, that she does ultimately sign it. So do see some, you know, do look out for some information from us about that bill, about working to make sure that that's one that does receive the governor's signature. And that will need to be signed by the end of this year. Some of you may be familiar with the idea that there's a 10-day period that the governor has to sign a bill after it's, after it passes both houses. Now, the state legislature has found a loophole in that where that 10-day clock doesn't start until they send the bill to the governor for her signature. So that's why you'll see bills that sort of are waiting in this sort of netherworld of limbo, waiting before they get sent to the governor for her signature. And once that does get sent over, that's what triggers that 10-day clock for her to sign or to veto it. So it may not be until the end of this calendar year that that bill is ultimately acted upon. For the other 6 bills, unfortunately, by dying at the end of this session, that means that they are dead. And to be reintroduced as bills, the sponsors would need to resubmit them this year. Now, of course, the hard work's been done on all of these. The bills are fully written, they're ready to go. There is the opportunity to tweak them to address perhaps some of the concerns that folks may have, or to explore some opportunities that others may see. But the bills do all need to be reintroduced in their respective houses by their sponsors. Now, for this package of bills, there's a little bit of a challenge that is in front of us this year. And that's the fact that Assemblymember Patricia Fahey, who was the sponsor for 6 of these 7 bills, 5 of the 6 that are still pending, is not running for re-election in the Assembly. She's running for an open state Senate seat instead. And while we'll be thrilled to have her, should she win in the Senate, to be able to be another champion for these bills on that side, to have all these bills reintroduced next year, we will need to be finding new legislative sponsors for them in the Assembly. So that's something that we'll be doing from PTNY's side, but we do always welcome suggestions from all of you as to who some of these good candidates might be to take on the role of being the Assembly sponsor of them. And I think we'd be thrilled to see, a few different people sponsor some of the different bills so that we can get some broader support for the full package. And also so we can avoid this issue that we're facing right now, where if one legislator leaves, we've got to scramble to find new sponsors for all the bills. But with that, I did want to move into a little bit more of an open forum and allow for a brainstorm of some new bill ideas. So we have 2 on the screen that are ideas that we had gathered at Greenways Advocacy Summit, or that have come from discussions around the Greenways Advocacy Summit. And then I want to open it up to folks, other ideas that they may have. So you can feel free to put in chat, you can put in the Q&A. But I'll talk through the first 2 first while folks are sort of typing out any ideas they may have. So the first one is an idea that came out of actually a meeting that I was in with my group on Greenways Advocacy Summit. And that was the idea that legislation could create a new fund for the maintenance of Greenway trails, and that it could be modeled after the CHIPS program, where municipalities receive a portion of funding that is in proportion to the mileage of, well, for the CHIPS funding, they receive funding in proportion to the mileage of roads that they have in their district, as well as the total use of those roads overall. And so if this trail maintenance fund were created, that would be a potential model that could be explored, where it would be something where municipalities receive funding based on the mileage of trails in their district, or within the municipality, the mileage of trails that they have maintenance responsibility for, and have some provision in it for the use of those trails. A second legislative idea that was one that was discussed in the morning program was the idea that the statewide transportation improvement plan, the STIP, which is one of these really technical documents that state DOT creates every year, or on a periodic basis, that there is some legislation that would require them to set aside a minimum percentage of funding within that statewide transportation improvement plan for active transportation projects, bike ped projects, as well as trail projects. This would be a departure from how our state currently funds transportation projects, where a large percentage of it goes to highway projects. I know the Regional Plan Association recently did some great work looking at doing an analysis of the STIP. And so the idea for this bill would be that it would be one that would require that a certain percentage of project or of funds in the STIP go to projects that are for active transportation purposes. So with that, open to other ideas folks may have, but I know we are kind of putting you on the spot. And so if you do have any other ideas, send them along, send us an email. We'll have our contact information at the end. And, we're always open to ideas that folks have. We do have a question in here from Brian, who asked if there are any thoughts on extending the detour bill to other greenway trails throughout the state, or turning the Empire State Trail into an Empire State Trail system that includes a number of greenways that connect the EST as a backbone. And I can say that both of those are absolutely ideas that I think we've discussed internally. I know the latter has been an idea that I've been very supportive of for a number of years now. The idea that the Empire State Trail should be a broader network designation and not just the single, the trunk lines of the EST. I think one of the challenges with looking to extend the detour bill to other greenways throughout the state is that there currently isn't a definition in state law for what a greenway trail is. And that's actually one of the things that the bill for the Greenway Trail Design Standards would have addressed. It had language in there that would have established the definition of a greenway trail in state law that then could have been used in other legislation to help provide a broader context. I think that without that, you'd be hard pressed to try to see this bill expanded, but I absolutely think that it would be something that we'd be supportive of, seeing that anytime a greenway trail is closed, that a detour needs to be provided, recognizing that greenway trails from the longest in the state to a number of local shorter trails provide both critical recreation and transportation functions. So any other ideas that folks have, we're happy to address, but I think Kathleen has a question here, and I think that it sort of is a good dovetail to the next slide. So Erica, why don't we move to that? And that is to talk about funding, to talk about the need for dedicated capital funding and how we can get funding to implement planned and proposed trails. And what I'm going to say is that one of the biggest needs that we have as a state right now in demonstrating the need for Greenway Trail funding, or in securing Greenway Trail funding, is demonstrating that need. We all know of some great projects that could go a long way to helping expand our Greenway Trail network, to helping connect some of the shorter segments of trails, to build some of the grander visions of trail networks that folks across the state have envisioned. I mean, we've looked at the regional trail plans, at the MPO bike ped plans, at specific trail corridor plans that a number of our partners have completed. Things like the Long Island Greenway, the Open Space Institute's West of Hudson Growing Greenways plan. There's a number of great plans out there. And we need to aggregate all of that into one place so we can demonstrate to our state leadership exactly what that need is and exactly what the impact would be if there was dedicated funding for greenway trails. So this is an open call for projects with a funding estimate. If you're aware of a project for a greenway trail that needs funding, send it to us so that we can include it in this broader aggregation of what some of these top projects are. Now, I want to make sure that we're clear. You're not applying to us for funding. This wouldn't necessarily guarantee that in any funding proposal we share with the second floor that a specific project is or isn't included. And it's not a binding figure. What you send in an email to me as the cost for doing a project does not mean that you would be restricted to only receiving that amount of funding. This is just a sort of back of the envelope, a sketch estimate so that we can have some justifiable number to demonstrate to our partners in state government, here is what this need is. Here is what the impact could be if there was funding provided. And so I do want to go back to one of the questions that we received from Kathleen Nolan, which is how these funding proposals relate to existing funding for active transportation. And I think that the idea is that they would build off of them. Kathleen specifically asked about the Transportation Alternatives Program that's managed by New York State DOT. Now, that's managed by New York State DOT, but it's federal transportation funding that is passed through from US DOT to New York State DOT and then made available through a competitive funding process. Now, I think the hope would be that by providing additional dedicated funding from the state budget, we would be able to tap into that federal funding by providing a more consistent source of matching funds to be able to provide the matching funds that's needed to access federal funding. A lot of federal funding has a 20/80 match requirement where you need to have 20% of the funding from a local or other source to be able to access the 80% of the project's cost that the federal funding would cover. And so the hope would be that by providing this dedicated state funding, we'd be able to access an even greater amount of federal funding that's out there. There's an unprecedented amount of federal funding for Greenway trails that's available currently. Another question, and this is back to I think one of the earlier ideas, which is that the actually I'm going to put a pin in it and come back to it at the end because it's a little bit off of the topic we're on now. We do have a question about if there's ideas for a project, but don't know if there's a plan or estimate for one. How do you get that estimate? How do you help develop a plan? And I think the answer to that is feel free to send us an email. We're happy to work with you on it. We're happy to see if there is something out there. If you do know local planners, county planning department, your MPO, those are folks that will be familiar with what plans have been done. They are also a good place to start to look at. Sometimes even just Googling there, we're surprised constantly by a project that we'll hear of that despite the fact we've been doing this for a number of years now, we're not familiar with. And you never know what you might be able to find out there. So, but yeah, if you're ever unsure, if you ever aren't clear on sort of where to start or how we can go about developing that estimate, send us an email and we can work with our partners to try to come up with a defensible figure. So with that, let's move on to the next slide, please, Erica. So this is, again, an open brainstorm, some strategy ideas. And Will, maybe you want to kind of chime in here to this idea that, that I know we've discussed a little bit. This idea that there could be an Empire State Trail delegation of folks who represent districts that include the Empire State Trail within them.
Sure, thanks, Dylan. Yeah, this is something that we've been kicking around internally as part of a strategy, understanding that legislative efforts in particular are typically multi-year efforts. And the Greenways Advocacy Summit was certainly sort of a start. We have some exciting things in the pipeline for fall of next year, which we can get into a little bit later or another time, but we really wanted to cue things up for 25, 26, 27. And so this idea that we need to have a stronger delegation within the legislature, I think, is a really well taken point. So essentially crafting a coalition by essentially saying legislator X, Greenway Trail, the Empire State Trail, the Erie Canal Trail runs through your district. As a result, you are a member of this coalition, and the work that we're doing to talk about greenways, their needs, how to expand them, their economic impact, those types of broader issues relate to you and your constituents. And so certainly we would identify some leaders within that broader sort of delegation, but just as a way to make sure that the information is reaching those key stakeholders and decision makers, that it's a unified message, and there's a building the foundation of understanding about the needs of the system. So generally straightforward thought process there, but something that we're really considering and would certainly be able to work in or dovetail in some other initiatives that Dylan and Erica outlined, some letter campaigns, some sign-on campaigns that would kind of go to support those efforts and initiatives.
So, and to your point, Will, we have identified who represents districts that the Empire State Trail runs through currently. And as you can see, it's a lot of districts. The Empire State Trail is long, runs through a number, it's not quite a majority of the districts in the state, but it does cover a number of districts. And it includes districts that are represented by some key leaders within the legislature. The ones highlighted in bold are folks who are chairs of some of the committees that have the most pertinence to our Greenway Trail and our Empire State Trail advocacy efforts. Folks that represent the Environmental Conservation Committee, the Parks Committee, and the Transportation Committee. All three of those committee chairs in both houses represent, actually, no, I'm slightly off on that because the Senate, that's not the case for, but the Senate, the majority leader of the Senate also represents a section of the Empire State Trail. So, there are key important legislators that could potentially be part of this delegation, were it a thing we create. And I will note that these, of course, are the current representatives, and that a lot of these are subject to change. And in fact, some are absolutely will change before the next, or as a result of the election this fall. So with that, I think we're going to move to the next slide. And this is just talking about some of the next steps. Looking at, how we can sort of build a broader coalition. Now, I know that there's been a lot of, it's been us up here talking today, but we know that PTNY and that our Greenway advocacy efforts are not going to be successful if it's just one organization that is doing the legwork. And, we don't think that that'll have the greatest impact around the state. And so we want to work with all of you. We want to help build out this broader coalition of groups that are partners in advocating for Greenway trails. And we know that so many of you have a much better idea of the needs and of the opportunities for Greenway trails in your communities. And so as a next step, if you haven't already, please fill out this Greenways Coalition interest form. We can put the link to it in the chat as well. I like when Erica's like hit send as soon as I say that. That was great timing, Erica. And then it's also, I mentioned the project funding estimates to help inform some of the capital funding need. Send those over to me as an email. My email's up on the screen. And so with that, I'm going to kind of go back to a couple of open questions that folks had. If you do have any other open questions, I encourage you to put them in, either in the Q&A section or in the chat, or send us an email. We're happy to circle back afterwards. But Laura had an idea about subsidizing bike use on Amtrak, noting that the bike fee to bring a bike on Amtrak within Vermont is only $5 because the state subsidizes it, and asking whether we can advocate for New York State to do the same. I think that's a great idea. I think that it's absolutely something that would have a huge impact on supporting bike tourism. However, I know that the challenge with bikes on Amtrak is also one of capacity and of providing sufficient space to meet the demand for bikes being brought aboard Amtrak trains. And I know that that's something that we've been advocating with DOT to help address, to apply for grant funding, encouraging them to apply for grant funding to address. And I think that there's a room for more opportunity to push Amtrak and to push New York State DOT to understand the important relationship between bike use and passenger rail. A next question that we have is again from Kathy, talking about the EST delegation, but also suggesting that we add in folks who are not on the EST, but are strong trail advocates. And I think that that's absolutely a great idea. I know that one thing that we had tried to do in the past was to create a Trails Caucus, and that due to some of the internal politics in the legislature, creating a caucus that's an officially recognized thing is something that you can't do. So by creating some sort of default designation that, de facto includes all of the folks who represent a specific geography, we're sort of avoiding that issue. But I think that it's something where if we do look at expanding the Empire State Trail network to include a number of the feeder trails as well and other long distance trails, I think that's a way that we can start to build that EST delegation to include some of those who aren't on that main spine of the Empire State Trail as it's currently constituted, or to try to get folks who want to be connected better to that spine, have them join this network so that they can really push alongside those who are on it. So I think moving on to the next slide then, Erica, which I think is just sort of a quick wrap-up slide. You know, we're still here. If you folks have any other questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A, put them in the chat. You know, we can stay on for a couple of minutes and answer some questions that folks have. I'm going to change the settings right now just to allow folks to unmute themselves if they would like. I believe I can do that. But at first, I just want to thank you all for coming and, you know, taking the time to join us. And thank you as well for all of your great work to help us advocate for our state's Greenway Trail Network. We really do appreciate all the time that folks have put in and recognize that it was through the efforts of those who advocated on May 20th, but also from those who contacted their legislators separately, that Empire State Trail Detours bill was able to get passed. So thank you, everybody. Like I said, feel free to ask us any other questions and we'll stay on. So Kyle has a question about doing a candidate survey for legislative candidates and related to the Empire State Trail delegation. That's not something that we've necessarily been involved with in the past. I know a number of other folks do a little bit more work around you know, candidates for office. It's something that we would need to discuss you know, with our board internally. That would be a sort of a realm that we haven't necessarily stepped into previously. Yes, and Keisha has a suggestion about the EST delegation and allies. I do like that. I think the way to include some of those staunch trail advocates that aren't necessarily on the trail. All right. Well, thank you everybody again for taking the time to join us. We'll be in touch towards the end of the summer with some more information. And, you know, we look forward to being back in the Capitol with all of you to continue to advocate for our state's Greenway Trail Network.